Okay, thanks for inviting me. It's a great thrill to be presenting here to this group. And I was telling Andrew, I hope I'll be able to go fast over some of the like Scottish Gaelic things because this is a talk that I haven't given very many times. It's a topic that's quite dear to my heart at the moment. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot since I got on sabbatical. And for those of you who were hoping to hear something about tense and aspect, modality, or in fact, anything semantic at all, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. There's no semantics in this talk, but there might be some phonology and prosody. So no apologies. I will just launch in. The first part of this talk is very ordinary, and it's going to get weirder and weirder as I go on. So I will hopefully get slower and slower. The first part will be quite fast because I think everybody knows this stuff already. So actually what the talk is about is word order typology. And I think that, far from this being a solved issue, like, okay, nobody has any problem deriving VSO order, right? I want to argue that it's just not true that we've solved this problem. And there's some very, very basic bread and butter facts about Scottish Gaelic word order and VSO in general that we're simply not deriving with the current toolbox. So I want to propose to ditch the current toolbox and look at it from a slightly different perspective. And I have this quote here from it's actually Bennett et al. On the Berwick and Chomsky notion of externalization. And I want to think about word order as a species of externalization, which is a translation of hierarchical and recursive representations that the syntax and the semantics build, based and grounded, I believe, in meaning, into the kinds of serial representations that, of course, that are embedded in time and that we have to perceive and decode. Every language needs to do this, and they need to do it in a predictable fashion so that the hierarchical representations can be recouped. So it's a kind of an algorithmic problem that every language has to solve. And so this is the perspective that I'm going to take on the whole idea of word order in Gaelic, but also, word order typology and what you need to say when you know a language, what you need to learn to speak it with the right word order. So it's going to be a lot about architecture. Of course, there are two main approaches. In the old days, there was that idea that we would parameterize head complement order directly, and that gave way to a more common view since Kane 1994 with the LCA, where you would have a single universal functional sequence and a single mapping between hierarchy and order, so that specifier comes before head, comes before complement. So to get the word orders for different languages, you have to have different kinds of movements to distort that base to create word orders that are different from SVO. In fact, you in the current toolbox, you need to do movements just to get basic SVO as well. But I want to promote a third option in this talk. I'm going to, the name for the sort of general family of approaches, I want to call direct linearization. And that is to assume a common hierarchical system across languages, and then different linearization algorithms that are language specific. So what's the difference between what I'm assuming here and the old head parameter thing? Well, it's different because I'm not assuming that the only thing you can vary is some parametric choice of head complement order. How is it different from Kane? Well, in particular, it's not going to assume any operations in the syntax that are designed purely to affect word order. So in this kind of way of thinking of things, we're not going to allow ourselves word order movements, what I'm going to call WOMs for short, because it sounds vaguely insulting. So I want to get rid of things like EPP, head movements, remnant movements, roll-up movements, etc. Okay, so that's the family of approaches that I would call direct linearization. Now, Scottish Gaelic is a well-behaved VSO language. Here are some general characteristics of VSO languages that tend to be true. This is 12% of the world's languages. They have a number of things in common. For the next few slides, I'm just going to scoot through some really basic properties of Scottish Gaelic word order, just to remind you of the things we need to explain, and also to like go through this checklist so you see that in fact it's, you know, typologically not an outlier in this group. It's quite well behaved. Scottish Gaelic, of course, is V initial in both main and subordinate clauses. There are auxiliary constructions, but the tense is initial, and then that's followed by the subject, and then there are various verbal noun constructions where the object sort of can be before or after. OV in particular is a possible word order in the perfect construction and in non-finite verbal noun clauses. Scottish Gaelic is strongly prepositional, as is also typologically very normal for VSO language. There's a conjugation of the preposition le. And the nominal modifiers also go on the right. So it's not just V initial, it's also N initial in the nominal extended projection. Like other VSO languages, it has WH initial, WH questions. There's 1 in 9. And like many other VSO languages, it has no lexical item have. Okay. Here's a thing that we're going to come back to. Now, it's often noted in the typological literature that VSO languages very often have an alternative that's VOS. So it sits side by side, VSO. And that's one of the challenges in characterizing the word order of these languages. They very often have that as an alternative. And Gaelic doesn't seem to on the face of it, but it does have these copular clauses. And if any of you have, you know, have looked at these, you realize that there's a, you know, serious word order issues with figuring out how to derive this order. When you have the copula, it seems to give you the word order copula predicate, which can be phrasal, and then the subject at the end. Okay, so we're going to come back to that, but that looks sort of VOS-ish. Now, how have these been accounted for? As I said, most people don't think that verb initial is really a problem to generate because, after all, okay, let's put aside the A class of analyses there, because there's a bunch of Austronesian languages that typologically a little bit different from Gaelic, but usually to get Gaelic or Irish, what you would do is you would base generate the standard LCA compatible kind of SVO-ish order, and then derive VSO by movement. And in deriving that, you have a choice. Some people choose to phrasally move the whole VP, but you can also do that by head moving the V head. Clemens and Polinsky have a great review article of the different approaches to getting word order to come out right in this family of languages. Okay, so standard account for Scottish Gaelic would look like something like this. I've just given you some labels. Imagine that you've got the force head, the high complementizer, that's gun. And then there's some various tensey things. There's doc, which is the past tense, and lave, which is the verb read. And then there's me, the subject, that was, you know, has moved out of the VP to some higher specifier position, but not as high as the landing site of the verb. So gundulave, me lower, would look like that. And it really seems like there's no problem here. A lot of this work comes from Irish, of course, and Irish has some of these very, very basic things in common with Scottish Gaelic when it comes to basic clause order. So that was fast, but that was just like the background. Okay, now I'm going to give you a roadmap, because you need a roadmap now, because this is where I will get off the beaten path very rapidly. So first thing I'm going to do is describe some problems, I think, for the basic toolbox, and try to show you that we shouldn't be content with what's going on. In fact, there are loads of very, very simple things about the way word order in Gaelic works that we don't have any idea how to account for. So that's first. And then if I've convinced you that there's a whole bunch of things that we don't know how to account for, then I want to take you into like number 2 there, which is to argue for a rethink and show you that direct linearization is an alternative to some of the word order movement type theories that are out there. And then finally, we're going to get out into the bush and do some wild speculating about what would happen if we really did go back to first principles and try to build a linearization algorithm for Scottish Gaelic that would deliver on some of the descriptive generalizations that I point out. Okay, so first I want to talk about, we're in 1 now. We're going to describe the problem. And the first of those problems is adverbial placement. And it's a part of a general issue, but just the very, very basic clause. It's not enough just to raise the verb or say that the complementizer in C is in C. In our current theories, we expect adverbs to be able to be attachable to the XP level. And if we let adverbs attach, then we will get word orders that are just not attested. So we need to make some sorts of extra stipulations to ensure that none of the specifiers of the higher heads can be filled, or other no adjuncts can be placed in those positions. So there are a lot of ad hoc provisions on adjunction which just look like they have to sit on top of the basic head movement story. So let me just show you what I think the broad landscape of adverbial placement in Gaelic seems to be. And this is based on a combination of data I got from Andrew's archive, the University of Arizona Archive of Scottish Gaelic data, which has a number of sentences with adverbial placement. And I followed that up with Muriel with some extra questions about certain adverbial placements that I was interested in. And in some cases, I've also taken some data from David Adger's published work. So this is by no means an exhaustive treatment of adverbial placement, but I just want to point out some things that are really kind of, I think, striking even at this course level. So if you say Iain at the apple quickly using savat, you can put that at the end, Yich Iain an Noel savat. But if you try to put quickly at the beginning of the sentence, it's not very good. And in between the verb and the subject, it's not very good. And in between the subject and the object, it's not very good. That was a low adverbial. Things are slightly different if you take a framing adverbial like gumiorstanach. Gumiorstanach can occur at the beginning of the sentence. So you can say gumiorstanach ich Iain an Noel. But it can also appear at the end, as in 16. But it doesn't seem to be very good in between the subject and the object. Now, I will come to the auxiliary constructions because there are sentence internal good places for adverbials where my informant was accepting them much better with auxiliaries. But with these simple sentences, adverbs at the end are very good. And the most default order I got for the adverbials in 18 was that quickly is much nicer before unfortunately. And this is default order without any big pauses. And this is reminiscent also of things that happen in Germanic languages where at the right edge, you see the adverbs stacking up in sort of reverse hierarchical order. Okay, it's a problem for many word order problems, many word order facts in other languages than Gaelic as well. Now, if you have an auxiliary construction, then here we have one in 19, and we have getricht and gesleutelt, which I've tried to put. This is data from David. You can put these adverbs in between the subject and the aspectual phrase. If you look at 20, you find that you can put something like Gutrich before the aspectual phrase that begins id. But then if you look at that aspectual phrase, id na leorichin shin areich, you cannot put Gutrich in between id and na leorichin shin, and you can't put it in between na leorichin shin and areich. But you can put it before the id phrase, and you can put it after the id phrase. Okay, so somehow nothing is going on in between there. Here's an interesting sentence. Let's just sort of probing now the space between the tensed verb and the subject. You can get sentences like 21 where you can put Gutrich, so ha Gutrich, Hollenach sen Leurlang. But this is only possible in certain circumstances with certain kinds of indefinite subjects. So the classical subject position, the spec TP, which definite sort of name subjects is assumed to land in, those don't seem to allow an adverb in between them. So if you try to do that with column, as in 22, ha Gutrich, column sen Leurlang is not very good. And also it's reported that you can't put parentheticals, ha hamikinchoch, column Gutrich, sen Leurlang. So there is it's very restricted. Once that spec TP position and the position of the high tensed verb also there's no space there for a junction. I should also mention at this point that Emily Elfner, in her dissertation, she was looking at Irish, of course, she did some acoustic analysis on simple sentences like 24, and she showed that there's little or no evidence for a prosodic boundary, indeed, between the verb and the subject, although you do see a sort of prosodic boundary in between the subject and the object. So that's quite a tight unit there. So to sort of summarize, you can get the adverb placement in Gaelic. You can get high adverbs, framing adverbs in initial position. Low adverbs are not very good in initial position. All adverbs appear in final position quite happily. If you combine them, they seem to have a preferred order, reverse hierarchical towards the end. The bad thing about this picture is that we have no clear way of regulating which projections are allowed for adverbial adjunction and modification. And in fact, getting that V initial order crucially relies on preventing adverbial attachment to the left of the projection that the verb raises to or that the subject raises to. Okay. So you want to be able to get, complementizer, tense marking verb in a sequence, and you have to find a way of disallowing any adjunction between them. Otherwise, you're just simply not capturing a very robust fact about Gaelic word order. So I tried to draw a little diagram here, just summarizing basically what I see the pattern is. I don't know if you see my goodness, my cursor just goes behind the picture. So the dotted lines there are places where you can get a junction. I've sort of X'd where you can't get left adjunction. But on the assumption of right adjunction, it seems like all of these projections allow right adjunction. And then if you did right adjoin, you would get them in the order that you expect. So that looks like the picture, and these places where you can't adjoin, they're just kind of a mystery. Like we don't have any sort of non-ad hoc way of figuring out why Gaelic doesn't allow adjunction to those positions. Okay, and then the second problem is the copula clauses that I've alluded to before. And that is, these have had a lot of different treatments in the literature, like going back to Andrew's PhD dissertation, where he proposed sort of an ingenious syntactic analysis of those constructions to get them to work, which is based on the idea that something behaves like a head if it moves like a head, and rather than being inherently characterized by its size. And he had to head move a phrase to get it to the front. And basically, a lot of people come up with a lot of ingenious things over the years, but there's no real consensus. And you always require something a little bit funny. The movements in question have to be a little bit different, a little bit more unusual, a little bit not what you'd expect from a standard syntactic movement. I give you 27 from Doherty's dissertation just to show you that, in fact, the right position subject there, this is from Irish, by the way, the right position subject there, C commands into the reciprocal anaphor in the predicate. So showing that even though it's in the right position, it C commands the predicate. So those really are subjects, and they are at the end. And then the final problem, so that I'm throwing in here, is the basic problem of the positioning of light pronouns. And if you just look at 28 first with an object, which is Ian. I saw Ian. If I saw Ian, Ian has to sit there right after me, chunig mi Ian. But and it doesn't have any really word order flexibility. But if you have a pronoun there instead and say chunig mi sigarig araid, then you in addition have the word order possibility chunig mi sigarige araid, and you can also say chunig mi sigarig araide. So that little pronoun can float rightwards. And this has been discussed by Bennett et al. And also by David. And this is a problem too, because it shows, these guys have shown that if you wanted to capture this by syntactic movements, then they would have to be the kind of syntactic movements that would have to be able to lower into islands. They are syntactic movements that don't feed other syntactic movements. They don't feed ellipsis, and these movements don't have any information structure import as well. So if they are movements, if they're going to be done by movements, then they are not movements that we are used to thinking of as like syntactic. It's not the way you expect syntactic movements to behave. Yeah, they're not normal syntax. They break syntax. Okay, so all of these things. So I think the light pronoun problem breaks syntax. I think the copula clause problem breaks syntax, and I think adverbial positioning breaks that standard toolbox for getting typology. You cannot really. It's very hard to see how you would state those patterns. Okay. So I think that now these break syntax. The problem is that people are using syntax, they're using word order movements to capture these facts. And I think that's the mistake. I think it's an architectural mistake. And so I want to pursue direct linearization theory. And in a sense, Bennett, Elfner, and McCluskey were doing something like that with their paper on Irish. And I want to take it even further, right? So they were just trying to account for pronoun postposing with it. But I want to just say, language is telling us that we have drawn we've made a division between syntax and the mapping algorithm and phonology in the wrong place. So let's see what would happen if we reconfigure the system. So direct linearization is fed by a labeled hierarchical representation, but crucially, the hierarchical representation has no linearity information present. Therefore, you can't even state a word order movement transformation. Some people have been playing with these. You will see some examples as I go along. So the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about why I think we can do without roll-up movement and why we should do without roll-up movement. And to remind you what that is, let me just take universal 20 as a starting point, right? This is the ordering within the nominal projection. Universal 20 comes from Greenberg's, that's Greenberg's original number. And Cinque has been working on this for a long time. And what they do is they try to account for the orders of determiner, demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun that occur as basic word order patterns in the world's languages. And you can start off with that hierarchical order, dem over num over adjective over noun, and do a bunch of movements. And if you constrain those movements right, you can generate just exactly the movements, just exactly the orders that are attested and not the ones that are not attested. And to constrain the movements, you have to say, okay, landing site, C commands the launching site, the filler precedes the gap, and here's the kind of cinque and crucial one. You can only move a constituent if it contains the head of the extended projection. And then you have to, of course, start off with this common base hierarchy. Yeah. So in all of these, in this sort of mini part of the discussion here, I'm going to, just so that you don't lose track of the numbers, when it gets abstract, the higher numbers are lower. You know, they're bigger, they're heftier, they're lower in the functional sequence. No, yes. So the little numbers like 1 are high up, and the numbers like 4 are lower down. Okay. So movements that have been proposed here, these roll-up movements, they do go against previous proposed syntactic movements, and there's no evidence from either constituency or interpretation for these movements. They're there purely to get the word order right. Nevertheless, there is a typology here. Not everything goes. And I think what this typology does is it shows us the reality of the base hierarchy. And the word order manipulations, the sort of algorithms for how you move things around, there's simply one implementation or description of how to generate the attested orders. In general, the orders that never show up as information neutral default orders are the ones that have this sort of suborder 213 in them. So you never get 213. So any subsequence that looks like 213 is unattested. Okay. So if there is a typological generalization and it can be captured by these particular constraints, doesn't that give us abstract evidence for WOMs? Actually, I don't think so. I think it's one way of implementing them, but in fact, it's an extremely baroque way. And there are simpler ways to see what that pattern is. So here I'm going to cite somebody who's also at the University of Arizona. I don't know whether he's in this talk, but I think Medeiros 2018 makes a very important observation, which is that if you have a hierarchy, which you state as a sequence 4, 3, 2, 1, then the typologically attested orders are just those that can be sorted into that hierarchy by the simple stack sorting algorithm from Knuth, 1968. What's a stack sorting algorithm? Well, here's a description. This is how Abels describes it. So you have an empty stack, and then you have an input order coming in for each input value. If there's nothing in the stack, then you just push X onto the stack. Then the next one comes in. If it's smaller, then whoops, you can't do anything. Then you have to push this X out and you put that guy in. But if it's bigger, then you can put it on top. And then when you're done, then you pop them out again. Right. So when the stack is not empty, you pop the top one to the output. And here's some pictures of how you want to do that. I don't know if you guys have read that paper in your syntax reading groups. I think I don't have time to walk you through how the algorithm takes this order on the right. You go through the algorithm. And then in all of these cases, this particular algorithm will spit out 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. So it will reconstruct, it will be able to spit out the hierarchy from even a messed up linear order. And it will be able to do that for lots of different linear orders, but not for 2, 1, 3. So 2, 1, 3 is where it fails. And that's the exact one that is not attested in the word orders of languages. So in other words, the attested word orders are the ones that can use a very simple domain general algorithm to recoup the underlying hierarchy. And my conclusion from this is that it shows that the system that maps from hierarchy to linear order, okay, what I call the language particular linearization algorithm, is not a part of core syntax. It should not be done by syntactic movements, but it is a part of domain general cognitive systems, which involve categorization, working memory, right, which are required to convert hierarchical arrays to linear strings. So syntax, the syntax is going to be building representations, which are hierarchical arrays, and there's going to be some algorithm which maps from that to the linear string. And that algorithm is going to be constrained by domain general things about the way our cognition works and the way our working memory works. Now, there's a whole bunch of caveats here, and Abels has also written some stuff on this, and what he has said about this is that you actually, the stack sorting algorithm actually has to be relativized to heads, arguments, and adverbials. They have to be treated differently. Otherwise, the typological pattern dissolves. So the bottom line, doing that without roll-up, while there's still a lot of details to work out, my take-home message from this is that roll-up WOMs are an architectural mistake, even for poster child cases, such as the U20. Instead, we're going to have to build direct linearization theories that have properties consistent with learnability and these domain general considerations. So the ability to characterize the category in terms of hierarchical depth. You need to be able to do pairwise comparison of those labels. You're going to need a working memory buffer before you transfer to the linear order. And heads, arguments, and adverbials need to be treated differently. Okay, so I think that those are some WOMs that just have to go. What about head movement? Well, many people think head movement is also a property of the externalization system, and I do too. Brody is a powerful early advocate of that position. He has one of the earliest DLTs for head movement. And what he notices is that functional material that's hierarchically higher than a root is linearized to the right of it as a suffix, whereas the opposite linearization is observed outside of the word. And this is what led to head movement analyses, going up and then left joining. Now, the basic observation is that it is quite common for languages to have distinct linearization principles for word internal bound morphemes than for the ordering of syntactically movable units. So in fact, I would go right ahead and define the phonological word as simply that innermost linearization domain. Okay, so there's two linearization domains, an internal one, and then where another step where you order those things. Note that this does not attempt to relate the phonological word to atoms of syntactic or semantic representation. But the phenomenon of word emerges whenever a language has two distinct linearization cycles which feed each other. So those are going to be words, and that's how we're going to build them. How are we going to build them in a DLT style theory? Well, we're going to help ourselves to Brody. I mean, what you see here in this slide is word mirror, which he made for agglutinative morphemes within a word. So these are head-head linearizations. And the point, what he said is simply, instead of doing movement, he said that contiguous heads simply linearize in bottom to top order. So the lower thing, it precedes the higher thing. And the other thing he innovates in the system is this diacritic at, which you need, which tells you the height of spell out. So if you look at the tree there in the slide, suppose X and Y are linearizing together as a head word, then by mirror, Y will come before X, but the at sign tells you that that whole thing is linearized low down and therefore will occur after WP and MP. So that's a very powerful little diacritic there, very simple, but it does a lot of work. I also think that this can be extended to synthetic words or adaptation to spanning in general. So you don't need to have agglutinative pieces for this to be true. So anytime you have a span, a word span, you can linearize it high or low in the span. And you do that with the @ sign. Now, so far, we don't have a satisfying account of the Scottish Gaelic head ordering that happens at the start of the clause. So here's an embedded clause, nach do vrien. We want the complementizer possibly bundled together with negation information and then past tense and then the verb. We can make a synthetic head spanning C and neg, but T and the verb are separate here. And in other verbal contexts, T and V are also synthetic. We could put a diacritic for linearization to allow the high placement of both of these word forms. So it's very simple, but we still have the problem of stopping things going in between. And also, we can't make the whole stretch of morphemes into a single span because this order would violate mirror. And we assume, following Brodie, that that is the characteristic of the word internal linearization domain. So another thing we need to incorporate information about what counts as a word or what is the scope of the head word, we also need asterisk. So a head subscripted with an asterisk indicates that the head must form a Brodian word span with the contiguous heads up to the next star. So for Gaelic, so far, we can, so that the head movement part of it in a DLT would be implemented in a Brodian style. You see the @ signs showing that the verb word that's marked with tense is very high, and then the C. I've left off the neg head here, and then the span from V to T is what happens when you have a main verb. So the bottom line on head movements, just like the bottom line on worms, is that we can do without head movement. So there's nothing in the way of moving to a completely pure DLT system. We adopt a system like Brodie's for the word internal linearization domain, and we need, in addition to interface with the rest of the word order, we're going to need an asterisk for the scope of word formation, and we need this ampersand sign for the height of spell out of those thingies. Okay, so hold on to your hats. So now we're into wild speculation. So that was just kind of, yes, we can do this, and we should get rid of roll-ups, and we should get rid of head movement. So now let's see what would happen if we tried to do Scottish Gaelic word order from scratch. Going back to basics, taking only hierarchy and categorization as the independent primitives of the starting syntactic representation. And we ask ourselves the question, what if the syntax phonology mapping were responsible for word order in general and not just prosodic phrasing? Okay, so now I am not saying that head movement is in the phonology. I'm not saying that roll-up movements are in the phonology. I think that's a misconstrual of some direct linearization attempts. I think that what I want to say is that the illusion of moving things or displacement is because of the nature of the mapping between the hierarchical representation and how it decides to linearize. That's what I'm pursuing here. So there are no syntax internal displacements for word order purposes. And you might say, well, Gillian, aren't you just going to create a notational variant of the old thing? And in some cases, what we can build will be descriptively equivalent, maybe just different implementations that are mathematically equivalent. But in other cases, this kind of way of looking at things makes you look at things in a different way. It makes you see patterns and generalizations that you do not see before. And I think it also has some, there are different things that are easy to state and difficult to state if you clear the decks and look at it this way. So what might such a theory look like? Okay, now here's pictures. Now I really apologize for this picture, but here's my problem. I do not want to draw you a tree because I want to draw something which doesn't have any linear information in it. And I just can't draw that on paper. So if you take a look at what I'm assuming the starting point of hierarchical representation structure looks like, down here, that's XP4, that's the most embedded one. It's got a head and maybe an argument and maybe a modifier. And that's embedded in the next level, where there's another head 3, which takes that as its complement, and that could have an argument and modifier. And that's embedded in the next level, where there's another head 2, which could take that as its complement. Okay, maybe you don't like that, but that is my attempt at drawing something that had hierarchical representation, but does not tempt you into thinking that there's any order implied here at all. Okay, so let's say you start with something like that. Don't worry, I will have some slightly more normal looking trees later on. So here's the task I set myself. How do I state some algorithms to linearize structures like that? So I'm going to state the algorithm top down. And in each case, the material at the top of the hierarchy is the edge, and everything that's not the edge is the body. And then I'm going to say that the first rule, which is the recursive linearization rule, for any syntactic phrase XP with an overt edge and body, linearize the edge first, followed by the body. And this is just simple hierarchy. Hierarchy feeds order. The higher up, the lefter. Okay, so this part overlaps with the LCA. And it's recursive with respect to the body. So let me show you some pictures so you can figure out what I mean here. So here's a more normal tree. There's X selecting YP, like in a normal way. But what I'm saying is the edge here is this. Actually, this is something that Chomsky used to, at some point in some paper, called the edge. Why am I moving my finger here? That's not helping you. Hopefully you can see that cursor. So this is the edge, the head, the specifier, and a modifier, if any, and the rest is the body, okay? But it's recursive, so you order everything in the edge before body, but then within the body, you have to order that edge before its body, and then so on, and so on, and so on. So that's what I mean by saying that this is the first rule, it's the recursive step. Yeah, that's rule number 1. Edge before body. That's hierarchy. That's the part of the LCA that's correct. Now, complex edges. What happens if your edge is complex? In other words, it consists of both a head and a phrase, the specifier maybe. You have to order the edge. Well, what would you do? Well, you can either go word phrase or phrase word. I would say that languages can choose an iambic or a trochaic setting for that. So if you go for an iambic setting, you go head specifier. That's what Gaelic does. And if you're an SVO language, you're going to go trochaic, you're going to go phrase head. Okay. Gaelic orders the head before the specifier, and this is what gives rise to this tense subject linearization, and also the ASP direct object linearization in the perfect construction. Okay, so true specifiers do have the option of being linearized within a complex edge unit, but I think that we need a third rule, rule number 3, for non-selected phrasal modifiers such as adverbials. So there's a fair amount of evidence that adjuncts are attached to particular projections or zones of the clause, and they can attach at various heights, but they often seem to linearize independently of their hierarchically matched argument DPs, although they linearize with respect to one another, of course. Now, when they are alone in the edge position, if the head is empty, then they can just linearize preceding the body as according to rule 1. But we need another rule in our arsenal to deal with these things when the edge is heavy. So adjunct linearization requires a buffered system. So adjuncts escape linearization at their point of hierarchical attachment and are saved in a working memory buffer, which pop out for linearization at the end of each body computation. So now you need to look at this. So here, edge 1 before body 1. But within body 1, edge 2 comes before body 2. And within body 2, edge 3 comes before body 3. And then the buffered thing for the third level gets popped out. And then you're done with body 2. so that the buffered thing from level 2 can pop out. And then you're done with body 1, so that the buffered thing from level 1 can pop out. And if you pop out these buffered elements at the end of the linearization statement for the level, then what will happen is you will get the adjuncts popping out in reverse hierarchical order. So this will come out as edge 1, edge 2, edge 3, followed by the rest of the body, whatever's left of it, then the residue 3, so the lowest adverb, then the next lowest adverb, and then the highest adverb. So that's what buffering will give you for free. So I invented the buffering rule to account for the many cases where things on the right edge stack up in reverse hierarchical order, and I would propose to use it for adjuncts in Gaelic as well. So what would Gaelic have to look like? Scottish Gaelic in general imposes an iambic rhythmic pattern on its precedes relation. I think this is a very deep fact about Gaelic. This happens not just for the clause, it happens in the noun, it happens in the prepositional phrase as well. It likes to go da-da, head and big thing. Edge precedes body. I think that's pretty universal, but sort of open to parametric changes there. But within the complex edge, it seems that Gaelic has an iambic rhythmic pattern. Adjuncts give rise to heavy edge with filled heads, and they're placed in the buffer. Right? And as I've said, the recursive nature of the linearization algorithm and the different syntactic heights of adverbials will force these to end up in reverse hierarchical order. And when you do get left linearization of adjuncts, that's going to be dependent on the existence of an unfilled or unspanned head. So just to be specific here, one of my innovations with the linearization of complex edges is that I'm actually saying that the verb is in T and the subject is in specifier T, but the linearization algorithm says T specifier. So it's not the case that the verb moves higher than the TP, but that these are part of a complex edge linearization statement. And then, right, I've said that about the adverbs already. Empty unspanned heads allow for left linearization of adjuncts. So what I would argue, going back to this yellow picture here, is that the reason why we can have left linearized adjuncts is when there is extra functional structure which is not spanned by a whole verb, where the adjunct would not be creating a complex heavy edge. And very high framing adverbials can also attach very high in heads that are not filled. And there's the adverb stacking up on the other end. Okay, so I just have 1 or 2 slides left. I said this is about typology. What about VOS? Well, I think VOS is what happens in iambic languages when the subject gets linearized like an adjunct. And so the difference between linearizing within the edge and then going for the sort of buffer rule 3, is going to depend on something syntactic, like whether an agree relation between the head and the phrase has been established or not. So I think that this is something that a language can have variation within it, depending on whether there's a syntactic agree relation between the head and its specifier. And so what I would speculate for copular clauses is that in this case, the copula is base generated high, but the predicate does not have and the copula does not have an agree dependency with the subject. And so the subject will be buffered and will be linearized after the whole predicate phrase, just like adjuncts. And if we pursue this further, we would use the very same buffering rule 3 to order possessors and DPs, because there, by hypothesis, we would say that the noun does not have an agree relation with the possessor. What about light pronouns? Well, in some sense, Bennett et al. Are already a DLT theory, and we would exploit that too. And to say the present theory would say that the pronoun is ineligible for edge linearization because it's too prosodically small. And so it would have to be thrown into the buffer where it interleaves with adverbials. Finally, what about the typology of different word order languages? We're saying that Gaelic has a particular kind of parametric setting for these rules, which delivers VSO. For SVO, all you would need to do is have Gaelic, except rule 2 would give a trochaic ordering for complex edges, and that would give you SVO. And finally, suppose you had a language which did not like to linearize unequal daughters. This is a constraint that you find in some prosodic systems, star unequal daughters. Suppose you do not like to linearize a head in a phrase, you want to linearize two equal things, two phrases, then in such a case, a language with this linearization constraint would force heads to be shoved into the buffer as a matter of course. All heads would be shoved into the buffer. Only phrases would order according to edge-body hierarchy, and then the heads would stack up at the end in reverse order, and that would generate SOV and the inflectional stuff in reverse order. Well, that's what happens in Gaelic anyway. So the conclusion, I'm finally done. I think I'm probably 5 minutes over. And by the time I got to the end of this, I was very tired. I'm sure you're very tired now too, as well. So my conclusion is very simple. I destroyed many things. I began to figure out how to build them up again. And my claim is that this is sometimes useful and refreshing to see old taken for granted problems in a fresh light. And now I'm done.
That's everyone. Thank Gillian. Very
Hi, Heidi.
very fascinating talk. I'm going to take advantage of being the moderator today and ask at least some of my questions first, and I have a lot of them. The first question is more, at least it's my own personal data observation. I know Gaelic is an iambic language, but I think there's one critical exception to that, which is one of the pieces of data you're using, which is pronoun postposing, which almost always creates a trochee. So you say gutrichke, dampa, right? Gupale, right? I mean, and so that's sort of an interesting little twist on your data and analysis that
yeah. So, I mean, so crucially, right, I'm not saying Gaelic is an iambic language and what it wants to do is go through the sentence and just build iambs, and it's not going da-da, 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 da-da. That's, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there is something true to that intuition that so that is the setting for the complex edge rule. But when you place that weak pronoun into the buffer, and then you have to pop it out among the other buffered elements, that's I don't know, what's interesting about that word order effect is that it's not deterministic, right? In the sense that there are a number of different possible places that thing can end up. And so optional word orders is not something I've really thought enough about, and how and why some linearization statements end up being non-deterministic, where you get some wiggle room. And I don't know exactly how to represent that in the context of the algorithm. But the observation is correct that once you drop that light pronoun object in there, it tends to lean on the thing previous and create a trochee. Yeah. But as I say, I don't think anything I've said contradicts that.
No, I agree. I just wanted to point out there was that.
You're absolutely right. That's a nice, and a sort of a careful statement of those word order possibilities, and then the final. Of course, you have to say something about the light pronoun as well. Its clitic status and the fact that it leans in that direction is going to be what's going to end up building those trochees, I think.
Right. So my second question actually is on this too, because a long time ago I dabbled in this very question, and actually a view that's very congruent with yours. I'll send you some papers, unpublished papers that I wrote a long time ago.
Great.
But one of the slides you had was your hand-drawn slide with the concentric circles.
Yeah.
And what struck me about that example was in your actual approach, you're sort of hanging on with your fingers to hierarchical syntactic structure. But if you look at that structure you have right there, it almost is a dependency grammar, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a relationship between heads and dependents and modifiers. And it, you know, your circles look like in a way, a dependency grammar. And I wonder if rethinking the linearization instead of in terms of hierarchies, which I agree with you is really problematic, but instead in terms of dependencies might actually be fruitful, because you didn't go that far, right?
No, see now okay, so here's where like the sort of semantic side of me comes out. It's like, no, I really think that these representations, these mental representations of meaning and compositional semantics are hierarchical structures. That's sort of that's one of my starting points. What I think, in fact, is that these hierarchical structures are three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. They're not flat, and they're and I think one of the problems is, I mean, it's just completely unreasonable to think that they would be two-dimensional just because, you know, we conveniently had pen and paper and that's how we wrote them down. I think it's much more plausible to assume that these are more like molecules, and they exist in, you know, three-dimensional space. And right now I'm working with Miriam at the University of Constance to try to build me a tool for drawing syntactic molecules, you know, where I can show you a hierarchical representation, which is not ordered, but which is also three-dimensional. I think we need that to understand the way the semantics fits together and then how it feeds linear order. So I was really doing my best. My picture was just a picture to not make you think of a tree and not make you think of something flat, you know. But I don't want to then hitch my horses to another kind of flat representation like dependency.
Fair enough. When you see the handout I just sent you, you'll see that I actually have three-dimensional structures, and I'm going.
There you go. But yeah. I think it's obviously correct. It's just we haven't done it because we don't have the visualization tools.
So I better throw this open to other people. Do other people have some questions they would like to ask? Heidi.
Imagine that. Hi, Gillian. Good to hear your voice.
Hi, Heidi.
I really enjoyed it very much. I love the containment pictures, which is really what we mean with our brackets anyway. Yeah, so that's all good.
Yeah.
So as long as I've been hearing Dave talk about this linearization algorithm, it's clear that what's going on is that this is an idea that's a great idea for parsing. I feel like different views of the linearization syntax mapping have got either this kind of production angle or this parsing angle, and this is very much a parsing angle thing. It's like it tells you what the parameters on what's a parsable linear string are, but it doesn't tell you anything about how you get to that linear string. So the production angle is not there, right? You know, you've got the hierarchy that represents your semantic thing, and so the production starts with a semantic representation that's going to be a hierarchy, and then you've got to say something about how you get to a linear string, and that's what you're doing. So in a sense, and then what Dave says, the linearization, the stack sorting algorithm is how you get back to your hierarchy. So
yeah, okay, but it's not. There's nothing wrong with running this in reverse. So Klaus has thought about this a lot, and what he does is he says, if you want to go the other way around, if you have the hierarchy, and you want to replay that algorithm to figure out what order do I have to say the words in my language, right? Because that's what you're doing. and you've learned an algorithm, and some of them are going to work well with human brains, and some of them are not. Okay, but what you do is you have to if you want to state it in the other direction, you actually have to go top down and get right to left orders.
Right. No, all I mean is that the stack sorting algorithm tells you what you can do, but the algorithms of the kind that you're trying to develop tells you what you do in terms of production,
yes.
right?
Yes. So I mean,
but anything is gonna, like, you're gonna need an algorithm that's gonna be able to be adopted. So my impression actually from so I think these are very reasonable proposals. We know that language cares about sort of heavy, light, heavy structures. We know that language cares about edges versus, complements versus everything else. We know those all seem very to leverage ideas that we know matter.
So,
but my idea for, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my point about the stack sorting algorithm wasn't to say, and hey, I'm going to use a stack sorting algorithm explicitly. My point was to say, this shows me that the thing that people were capturing with these roll-up movements is an architectural mistake, right? There's something deeper about how you explain which orders work and which, because they always go, see, and I got all the right orders, and therefore these ones must be real. See what I mean?
No, and I agree. And I mean, I think that is a great beauty of Dave's proposal. All I am saying is that as you were talking, I was thinking a useful way to frame what you're doing is to say, so we know, let's say we know that the stack sorting thing is how you unpack. How do you pack, right? And so, so anyway, I was just sort of thinking also, and then I can imagine lots of other proposals for possible constraints on how you pack. So you've got a bunch.
But you have to make sure that the algorithm that the kid learns is one that is one that human brains can use to toggle back and forth between hierarchical and linear representation.
Right, but the thing is that the packing is a lot less constrained than the unpacking. The unpacking is constrained by stack sorting. The packing can be anything as long as it puts out something that's stack sortable.
Yeah, but how do you ensure?
You have a lot of freedom.
The constraints on the packing so that the unpacking will be stack sorting.
Well, so this is the thing that I think is actually, I think that you can assume that things that are not stack sortable are not going to survive just because they're never going to be parsed by anybody. So, that's like the role of communication in fixing the system, in constraining the system. So, my feeling about Dave's proposal is that you can do any bloody thing that is, doable in the human brain to generate a linear order, and then the output is going to be parsable or not according to whether it's stack sortable, and therefore is going to be reproduced. Anyway, all I mean to say is this is and I think the next step in thinking about how to do these things. I'm very glad you've taken it on. So hooray.
Yeah, no, I always like, I've been worried a lot about these word order things. And also I've hated roll-ups for so long.
Oh,
and I've always felt like we're doing word order the wrong way. And I think that there's lots and lots of problems. Once you start looking, so, this isn't an actual proposal yet. It's, to steal somebody else's term, it's a whole program of a way of rethinking a lot of problems, a lot of word order issues, a lot of phenomena that are usually thought of as syntax, thinking of them in terms of direct linearization theory. And then I think you get a lot of quite striking things coming out of it.
I have more to ask, but I will not for the moment.
Kevin is next.
Oh, just a couple of quick things. The theory was way, way beyond me. I don't understand it at all, or the terminology, but just from a practical Gaelic use, or some things about syntax that have kind of struck me. One was that I've had a feeling for a long time that pronouns rather, are not the same as nouns or noun phrases. I'm kind of used from English grammar classes in school that where you can put a pronoun where you get a noun or a noun phrase and vice versa. But I think in Gaelic, and you're kind of alluded to that with them being small, not just them going to the end, but they're a bit different. And the other thing was, maybe this has got something to do with what Heidi was saying, if I was understood. You come across these things in Gaelic that are translated into Gaelic because they have to be. And sometimes it's fun, Born Gaelic reports or Police Scotland or something. Was this written originally in Gaelic, or was it written originally in English? And sometimes you come across some sentence and what is that? You have to go back and read it again. And yeah, that was written in English for sure to start with. But what's wrong with it? And you think that everything's right with it. It's the right grammar, it's the right words, the right terminology. And one thing that struck me that goes wrong is in a VSO language. If the S is too big, you get lost. In a SVO language, you've got the V to divide the S and the O, which are kind of nouny things. But in Gaelic, if you get a huge, big, long S, which might have come from English with adjectives and adverbial phrases, you get lost. And what you have to do is split it into smaller sentences, or use a resumptive pronoun to sort of put the beginning and then start again. So anyway, that's two sort of practical things. So that maybe goes with what Heidi said about the linearization. You have to look at it and see whether it's processable by a human brain. That's maybe a bigger scale than what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, but so it's nice to hear just like the intuitions of native speakers there, that they really want, number one, you really do feel that the object pronouns are sort of a different thing. And then also, which I wasn't aware of, the fact that, because of this, the subject coming right after the verb and then the object after that you tend to prefer shorter subjects. And that when the subject gets too long, then you have to find some other way around it. You have to put that information somehow in a different sentence. Yeah, I'll have a look for that. That's an interesting, and of course that's one prosodic unit according to Emily as well, right? That the tense, verb, and the subject are kind of bundled together in this one sort of intonational phrase. Yeah, but yeah, thanks. I'll have a look at the corpus.
We maybe have time for one more question. Okay, Heidi, go for it, but it's short.
It's not
Try not to fight with Gillian.
No, but it's so much. It's the best thing. Anyway,
I
don't intend to be combative. It's just we always. Anyway, I am curious if you have any wild speculations about Germanic word order, about differences in embedded clauses. So the embedded blobs versus the matrix blob having different constraints that apply to them.
Yeah. So, this is, you're asking, in some sense, you're asking the right person, because I'm sitting here embedded at the University of Tromsø, where as we speak, there are at least 2 research projects on the go, trying to figure out how to characterize when you get embedded V2 and when you don't get embedded V2. And it's a freaking mess. I'm even one of the collaborators on one of these projects. And so what I've said so far about, DLTs and getting word order typology to come out of that, it hasn't even touched V2. Like V2, I have some thoughts about V2, but, a lot of it will depend on solving also the main and embedded distinction. But I do think it's got a lot to do with indexical anchoring. And that makes, so it's not like assertion so much as anchoring the author of the clause, and that makes a difference. And if you've got it anchored to the matrix, then the matrix can be, so it's like, so that embedded v2 is kind of in between real quotation and real embedding in a way. But it's there's a lot of weird stuff in v2 clauses, and a lot of optionality that I still, as I said in my answer to Andrew, I really, I don't know how to implement optionality in this class of theories yet. So I'm still thinking about that. Yeah.
I'm